You're quoting him wrong. The microphone carried my voice farther than I intended. A wave of laughter rolled across the university debate hall. More than 300 students filled the auditorium. Faculty judges exchanged amused looks. Phones lifted into the air, eager to capture another embarrassing moment. On the stage stood Evelyn Hart, the undefeated debate champion, president of the Debate Society, the student every freshman wanted to become. She slowly turned toward me, toward the library volunteer standing beside the aisle with a stack of returned books against his chest. Her eyebrow rose. "And you are?" she asked, smiling politely enough for the judges and sharply enough for everyone else. Someone behind me whispered, "The librarian's assistant." Another added, "Wrong room, buddy." The laughter grew louder. I ignored them. "The passage you're using from Ashes Before Dawn," I said evenly. "You left out the last paragraph. The author's conclusion contradicts your argument." Evelyn crossed her arms. "You've read it." "I have." She laughed, not loudly, confidently, the kind of laugh that made everyone else believe they should laugh too. "That book has never revealed its author's identity," she replied. "Half the literary community debates what he meant by that chapter." She tilted her head, and somehow her eyes swept over my faded volunteer badge. "The guy shelving overdue books understands him better than everyone else." The audience erupted. My fingers tightened around the books. The paper edges pressed into my skin. I had spent 4 years making sure nobody associated my face with those novels. Not because I feared criticism, because anonymity had been freedom. Readers judged my words, not my age, not my appearance, not my ordinary life. Evelyn raised the microphone again. "I appreciate confidence," she said, "but quoting interpretations from internet forums isn't exactly evidence." Another burst of applause. Someone shouted, "Sit down." Another yelled, "Go organize the history section." I looked at the judges. None intervened. One professor even smiled. I should have walked away. Instead, I spoke one sentence. "You're speaking about a page you never understood." The room froze for exactly one heartbeat. Then chaos exploded. She actually got called out. "Who does he think he is? What an ego." Evelyn's smile disappeared. Her pride had been challenged publicly. That was something she never tolerated. "Then enlighten us," she said. "You seem eager." "I don't need to." "Convenient. The book already explains itself." She stepped toward the edge of the stage. "No." Her voice hardened. "You interrupted my debate." She pointed toward the giant screen displaying the quotation. "If you're going to accuse me of misunderstanding literature." She smiled again. "Prove it." Every eye landed on me. The challenge wasn't really about literature anymore. It was about humiliation. Either I climbed onto that stage and failed, or I backed down and became tonight's joke. I lowered my gaze to the worn copy resting in my hands. The first edition, signed only with a single black feather. No name, never a name. The audience waited. I simply shook my head. "No." More laughter. Someone clapped sarcastically. "Knew it." Called his bluff. Evelyn looked victorious. I thought so. I walked toward the exit. Behind me, applause thundered. It sounded less like celebration, more like a courtroom delivering a verdict. Coward. Pretender. Attention seeker. The heavy auditorium doors closed behind me. Silence replaced the noise. Only then did I release the breath I had been holding. Still hiding, the voice came from the shadows. Professor Adrian Monroe stepped away from the wall. He wasn't smiling. "I suppose you enjoyed the show," I said. "I didn't." He folded his arms. "You could have ended that debate in 30 seconds and destroyed 4 years of work." She mocked her own words. She mocked someone she couldn't see. His expression became complicated. "You're too forgiving." "No." I looked back at the closed doors. "I simply don't need strangers to validate what I've written." Professor Monroe sighed. The publisher called again. "I know. They're demanding another public appearance. They've been demanding one for years. This time they're serious." I remained quiet. The old professor studied me carefully. "You heard what she said inside." "I did. She worships those novels." "I know. She organizes reading clubs around them." "I know. She wrote her scholarship essay quoting your work." "I know." He frowned. "And yet," I finished the sentence for him, She laughed at the person standing in front of her. A strange irony. She loved my voice. She dismissed my face. Professor Monroe handed me an envelope. The publisher wants an answer. I didn't open it. Instead, I slipped it into my backpack beside the returned books. I'll think about it. You've been thinking for 4 years. Then I suppose I need one more night. He nodded slowly. Don't wait until someone else tells your story. I watch him leave. His words stay behind. Someone else tells your story. The debate hall doors opened again. Students poured outside, still discussing Evelyn's victory, still laughing about the library volunteer who thought he understood literature. None of them noticed me, exactly as planned, except one person, Evelyn. She paused on the stairs. For a brief second, our eyes met. There was no guilt, only annoyance, as though I had inconvenienced her afternoon. She looked away first. I continued toward the library. Behind me, I heard her telling her teammates. People like that confuse confidence with intelligence. I didn't turn around. Some arguments weren't worth winning. Not today. But by midnight, an email waiting in my inbox would quietly begin changing everything. Rain drummed softly against the library windows long after the campus emptied. The building had always felt honest to me. Books never cared who held them. They didn't ask whether your shoes were expensive or your blazer carried the university crest. They only asked whether you listened. I wheeled the last card of returned novels into the storage room when my phone vibrated. Publisher, Hawthorne House. I stared at the notification for several seconds before answering. Elias. Margaret Sinclair's voice carried the calm authority of someone who negotiated million-dollar contracts before breakfast. I watched today's debate. My grip tightened around the phone. So Professor Monroe told you. He didn't have to. Silence. Then she added, half the audience uploaded clips. Of course they had. Public humiliation spread faster than literature. I assume you're calling to convince me again. No. A pause. This time I'm calling because I accepted an invitation. My chest tightened. What invitation? The National Young Writers Forum. I closed my eyes. You promised. I promised to respect your anonymity until it became harmful. And now, you're becoming a prisoner of it. She let the words settle. The organizers announced that the anonymous author known as Black Feather has finally agreed to appear. I didn't speak because I hadn't agreed. You can't make that decision. I already did. Margaret, you may refuse to walk onto that stage. Her tone softened. But then thousands of readers who believe your words help them survive grief, loneliness, and failure. She inhaled quietly. They'll believe you abandoned them. The storage room suddenly felt too small. The shelves seemed to press closer. I never wanted fame. I know. I wanted my books to matter. They already do. Then why isn't that enough? Because people eventually deserve to thank the person who gave them hope. I looked through the narrow window into the empty reading hall. Rows of abandoned chairs. Stacks of unfinished stories. A reflection of myself. Ordinary. Forgettable. Safe. Margaret broke the silence. The forum is this Saturday. So soon? Yes. And if I refuse, I'll cancel every future contract. My heart sank. You're serious. I protected your wishes for 4 years. She sighed. Now protect your own work. The line went dead. I remained motionless. Saturday. 3 days. Enough time to disappear. Not enough time to keep hiding. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't my publisher. It was the Campus Literary Society. Congratulations to debate champion Evelyn Hart for her outstanding defense of modern literature tonight. Attached beneath the announcement was a photograph. She stood beneath bright lights. Confident. Admired. Holding a copy of Ashes Before Dawn. My book. Someone had captioned the image. No one understands Black Feather better than Evelyn. Hundreds of comments agreed. I couldn't help smiling. Not because it was funny, because it was tragically human. People believe certainty far more easily than truth. The next morning, campus buzzed with anticipation. A guest lecture had been announced. Professor Monroe invited me to help arrange the auditorium. I arrived early, carrying boxes of books. Inside, Evelyn was already rehearsing. She noticed me immediately. Oh, her expression cooled. The interruption from yesterday. I came to set up chairs. You always seem to appear wherever books are involved. They're difficult to avoid in a university. One of her teammates snorted. She ignored him. Instead, she walked toward me. You know, she tapped the cover of Ashes Before Dawn. I reread the chapter after yesterday. I waited. You were still wrong. There was no anger in her voice now. Only certainty. That certainty fascinated me more than arrogance ever could. What makes you so sure? Because authors leave patterns. She smiled. I've studied Blackfeather for years. You've never met him. I don't need to. You're certain? I'd recognize the way he thinks anywhere. I looked at the worn novel in her hands. The margins were filled with handwritten notes. Questions. Interpretations. Fragments of admiration. She genuinely loved those stories. Perhaps more deeply than anyone else on campus. Yet she had looked directly at their creator and seen nothing worth listening to. Footsteps echoed behind us. Professor Monroe entered carrying a sealed package. Perfect timing. He handed it to me without explanation. My name was written across the front. Elias Rowan. Evelyn glanced at it casually. Then her eyes narrowed. In the upper corner, printed in silver, was the unmistakable emblem of Hawthorne House, the publisher of every Blackfeather novel. For the first time since we met, her confidence faltered. Professor Monroe placed the package into my hands as though it weighed nothing. To me, it felt heavier than every manuscript I had ever written. Evelyn's eyes lingered on the silver emblem. Hawthorne House. One of her teammates leaned closer. The publisher? Professor Monroe answered before I could. They've donated several first editions to the university archive. A smooth lie. Technically true. Entirely misleading. Evelyn relaxed. That makes sense. She looked back at me. I was wondering why a volunteer would receive something from them. I volunteer here every afternoon, I replied. They know the library. She nodded once, satisfied enough to move on. But as I carried the package toward the backstage office, I felt her gaze following me. Not curious, suspicious. The office door clicked shut behind me. Professor Monroe folded his arms. You almost told her. I didn't. You wanted to. I rested the unopened package on his desk. I wanted to ask why. Why what? Why someone who understands every page I write could completely misunderstand the person who wrote them. The old professor smiled faintly. Because readers don't imagine ordinary people creating extraordinary things. He tapped the package. They imagine legends. I looked down. My hands remained still. I never intended to become one. No, you made one. Silence settled between us. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside lay a charcoal gray suit. Simple, elegant. Beneath it rested an invitation. National Young Writers Forum. Guest of honor, Blackfeather. My name appeared underneath. For the first time. Printed. Permanent. Real. Professor Monroe watched me read it. You still have time to refuse. I know, but... I looked out the office window. Students crossed the courtyard beneath autumn trees. Among them was Evelyn, laughing with her teammates, holding my novel against her chest. But I don't think hiding is protecting me anymore. That afternoon, the campus literary club announced a special event. A panel discussion. Theme: Can anonymous authors truly understand human nature? The irony almost made me laugh. Professor Monroe insisted I attend, not as a speaker, as technical support, meaning I would arrange microphones, projectors, and water bottles while everyone discussed my work without realizing I stood 10 feet away. Exactly the sort of situation I usually avoided. This time, I stayed. The auditorium filled quickly. Students argued over theories about Blackfeather's identity. A retired professor. No, a woman. I heard he's overseas. My cousin swears he's over 60. I quietly connected cables beneath the stage. Invisible. Useful. Forgotten. Evelyn stepped onto the platform to moderate the discussion. The applause was immediate. She carried herself differently from most talented people. Not arrogant because she wanted admiration. Arrogant because she had received it for so long that it felt natural. We often ask why Blackfeather hides, she began. I believe anonymity protects honesty. Several students nodded. She continued. If readers knew who he was. Her eyes drifted across the audience. They might judge the author instead of the writing. I froze. That sentence. It was almost identical to something I had once told Margaret. Years ago, Professor Monroe noticed. He whispered, "Interesting. Very," because she had unknowingly defended the exact choice she mocked yesterday. A student raised his hand. If Black Feather appeared tomorrow. He grinned. What question would you ask him? The room became quiet. Evelyn answered without hesitation. I'd ask whether he has ever regretted remaining unseen. Her voice softened. His novels changed countless lives. She lowered her eyes toward the book resting on the podium. I think people deserve to thank him. The audience applauded. Something tightened inside my chest. Not guilt, not pride, something more complicated. She wasn't pretending. She meant every word. Yet yesterday, she had laughed at me before hearing a single sentence. Another student spoke. What if Black Feather turned out to be ordinary? The room laughed. Someone joked. Imagine if he worked in the library. More laughter. Evelyn smiled politely. I don't believe genius looks ordinary. Professor Monroe slowly closed his notebook. Without saying anything, I quietly finished adjusting the microphone, then stepped away. No one noticed, except Evelyn. Again, her eyes narrowed briefly, almost as though she was beginning to recognize something she couldn't explain. After the discussion ended, students surrounded her for photographs. I packed equipment into storage boxes. A familiar voice interrupted. You didn't stay for questions. I turned. Evelyn stood alone. Without the crowd. Without applause. I wasn't invited. You could have listened. I heard enough. She hesitated. About yesterday, I waited. I may have been harsher than necessary. It wasn't an apology. Not quite. More like someone acknowledging poor manners while remaining convinced they were right. I've already forgotten it. She studied my face. Have you? Should not. Her expression shifted. People often expected arguments. Defensiveness. Bitterness. Instead, I simply lifted another box. She stepped aside automatically. You really think I misunderstood that chapter? I think books change depending on who's reading them. A diplomatic answer. No. I met her eyes. It's the honest one. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Hawthorne House. She answered immediately. Hello. I looked away. She listened quietly, then frowned. What? A longer silence. You want me to attend a writer's forum? Her surprise was genuine. Ah, yes, of course. She ended the call. They've invited several student representatives. Congratulations. She smiled. I might finally meet him. Black Feather, the author she admired. The man she believed could not possibly be standing in front of her. I hope you do, I said. She looked strangely thoughtful. So do I. Saturday arrived beneath a pale gray sky. The National Young Writers Forum occupied the largest convention center in the city. Glass walls reflected hundreds of arriving guests. Publishers, journalists, novelists, readers carrying worn copies of books they hoped someone would sign. I remained inside a private preparation room. Margaret stood beside the mirror. She adjusted my tie with practiced efficiency. You still look like you're attending someone else's ceremony. I wish I were. She smiled. You always hated attention. I don't hate it. I looked at my reflection. I just never trusted it. A knock sounded. Professor Monroe entered. The auditorium is full. How many? Enough. He hesitated. And yes. Evelyn. He nodded. Front row. I laughed quietly. What? I interrupted her debate. And now she'll watch me interrupt her assumptions. Margaret looked at me carefully. Don't do this for revenge. I'm not. Good. Because revenge requires anger. I picked up my speech. I'm simply done hiding. Meanwhile, outside the hall, Evelyn adjusted the notebook she always carried. Its pages overflowed with handwritten quotations from Black Feather's novels. She had dreamed about today for years. Her closest friend, Natalie, nudged her shoulder. Nervous? A little. You've met famous speakers before. This is different. Because... Evelyn smiled. His books were there when nobody else was. Natalie laughed softly. You sound like you're meeting family. Maybe. She looked toward the enormous stage. Some writers save lives without knowing it. Backstage, Margaret handed me a fountain pen. One last thing. What? After today? She paused. You'll never be anonymous again. I know. People will judge your face. I know. They'll criticize your age. I know. They'll invent stories. I know. She smiled sadly. And some will insist they always believed in you. That made me laugh. They're loud. The lights dimmed beyond the curtain. An announcer's voice echoed across the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, thunderous applause answered. Margaret squeezed my shoulder once, then stepped away. Evelyn leaned forward eagerly. The host smiled at the audience. For 4 years, he lifted a familiar novel. One name has remained hidden. The room fell completely silent. Today, he turned toward the curtain. For the first time, another pause. Please welcome the author known worldwide as Black Feather. The curtain began to open. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. A tall figure stepped into the light. The applause exploded instantly. She stood to see better. Then, her smile disappeared. The applause continued. She didn't hear it anymore, because the man walking calmly toward the podium, the man accepting the audience's standing ovation, the man whose books had shaped her dreams, was carrying himself with the same quiet composure, the same steady eyes, the same ordinary face. As a library volunteer, she had laughed at across the debate hall. Her notebook slipped from her hands. It struck the floor with a sharp crack that somehow sounded louder than the applause. I saw it happen, saw her frozen expression, saw disbelief wage war against memory. I stopped before the microphone, looked directly toward the front row, toward Evelyn. Our eyes met. For the first time, she truly listened before I spoke. The applause refused to die. I stood beneath the white stage lights, waiting, not because I enjoyed the attention, because silence meant more after people had exhausted their excitement. Eventually, the room settled. I adjusted the microphone. My publisher prepared a speech. A ripple of laughter. I didn't. More laughter, softer this time. So, I'll tell you something true instead. I looked across the audience. Hundreds of faces. Readers, writers, students, professors, journalists. And in the front row, Evelyn. She hadn't moved. Her notebook still lay beside her chair. I've spent 4 years hiding my name. I paused, not because I believed I was important, but because I wanted my books to stand without my face. The hall became perfectly still. I thought anonymity would keep people honest. A faint smile touched my lips. It turns out, people still imagine whatever they want. No one laughed this time. I continued. I've been called a genius. I've also been called a fraud. I've been described as an old philosopher. I've been described as a grieving widow. Several people chuckled. Yesterday, I stopped. A decision. I hadn't intended to mention it. Yet somehow, it felt necessary. Someone told me that a library volunteer couldn't possibly understand my own novel. Gasps. Dozens of heads turned instinctively toward Evelyn. Her face lost what little color remained. I didn't point at her. I didn't accuse her. I simply smiled. I don't blame anyone, because assumptions are easier than questions. The audience applauded again. Not loudly. Respectfully. I looked away from Evelyn. I refused to let the moment become public humiliation. That wasn't why I had come. I hope, my voice softened, that after today, you'll remember the stories more than the person standing here. When I stepped back from the microphone, the applause became overwhelming. People rose to their feet, not because they had discovered my identity, because they recognized sincerity. Backstage, Margaret hugged me before I could escape. You survived. Barely. You were wonderful. I forgot half of what I wanted to say. You said what mattered. Professor Monroe joined us moments later. I believe, he said dryly, the internet has exploded. I sighed. As expected. No. He handed me his phone. As underestimated. Headlines appeared faster than I could scroll. Black Feather revealed as university library volunteer. Debate champion mocked mystery author 1 day before reveal. Clip of campus argument reaches millions. I handed the phone back. I didn't want that. I know. Margaret's expression darkened. But it's already happening. Across the convention center, Evelyn stood alone beside a floor-to-ceiling window. She barely noticed the city beyond the glass. Natalie approached carefully. Evelyn. No response. Evelyn. She finally blinked. I remember every word. What? Yesterday. Her voice sounded distant. Every sentence I said. Natalie hesitated. You couldn't have known. I know. Then why are you blaming yourself? Evelyn laughed quietly. A broken laugh. Because I always believed I judged ideas. She closed her eyes. But I judged clothes. Appearance. A volunteer badge. Her fingers trembled. And I never even asked his name. Natalie placed a hand on her shoulder. Go apologize. I can't. Why not? Because... Her voice cracked. Anything I say now will sound like I'm apologizing to the famous author, not to the quiet man I dismissed. She looked toward the auditorium doors. I should have respected him before I knew who he was. Natalie had no answer. Neither did she. My signing session lasted 3 hours. Thousands of books. Hundreds of conversations. A young father thanked me because one of my novels helped his daughter through chemotherapy. A retired soldier said he had started reading again after 20 years. An elderly woman cried while holding my hand. I thought I'd never meet you. I smiled. You already had. She looked confused. You met my words. She laughed through her tears. I suppose I did. Those conversations mattered. Far more than interviews. Far more than cameras. They reminded me why I wrote. Not to become known. To become useful. When the final reader left, I finally allowed myself to breathe. A volunteer approached. Mr. Rowan? Yes. Someone wishes to see you. Who? He hesitated. Miss Evelyn Hart. She waited outside the nearly empty signing hall. No reporters. No audience. Just us. The evening sun stretched long shadows across the polished floor. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she bowed. Not slightly. Completely. I'm sorry. Her voice shook. I don't deserve forgiveness. I watched her quietly. She remained bowed. I wasn't mocking a famous writer. I know. I was mocking a stranger. I know. And somehow, her shoulders trembled. That makes it worse. I waited until she finally looked up. Her eyes were red. Not from public embarrassment. From genuine regret. What are you apologizing for? I asked. She frowned. What? The debate. The assumptions? The laughter? All of it. I nodded slowly. Good. She looked surprised. I wanted to make sure. Silence returned. She took a careful breath. I've admired your books for years. I know. I built my scholarship essay around your ideas. I know. I even defended your decision to stay anonymous yesterday. A bitter smile crossed her face. And then, she looked away. I proved why anonymity was necessary. I couldn't disagree. She laughed once. At herself. Ironic. Very. Another silence. I expected you to expose me yesterday. I could have. Why didn't you? I considered the question. Because I wasn't interested in winning. She blinked. I wanted to understand. Understand what? Whether you mocked me because you were cruel. I met her eyes. Or because you genuinely believed appearances told you enough. Her answer came immediately. The second. I know. She looked startled. You knew. You hesitated. When? Before you laughed. She searched her memory. I don't remember. I do. I remembered everything. Not because I held grudges. Because writers notice pauses. They usually tell the truth before words do. She lowered her gaze. I've spent years teaching people to argue fairly. And I failed. No. She looked up. You failed to notice. A long breath escaped her. I don't know how to repair this. You may not. What? Not every mistake can be repaired. Her face fell. But, I continued gently. They can teach us something. She nodded slowly. I understand. No. I smiled faintly. I think you're beginning to. She laughed quietly despite herself. I suppose that's fair. Before either of us could say more, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Margaret appeared. Her expression was unusually serious. Elias. What happened? She handed me a tablet. Read. A news article filled the screen. Someone had leaked an internal email from Hawthorne House. It falsely claimed that my anonymous identity had been a carefully planned marketing stunt, designed to increase book sales. The story spread rapidly. Social media was already calling readers gullible. Journalists demanded explanations. Publishers began issuing statements. Margaret looked furious. We never wrote this. I know. Professor Monroe arrived moments later. I traced the leak. Who? He looked directly at me. It came from someone inside the university. I felt my stomach tighten. The timing wasn't accidental. Someone wanted my reveal to become a scandal. And whoever it was had already begun rewriting the truth. The conference room at Hawthorne House overlooked the river. Usually, the view calmed people. Today, no one looked outside. Margaret paced between the long oak table and the projector screen, her heels striking the polished floor with measured precision. They're calling it a publicity scheme. She tossed a stack of printed headlines onto the table. They're saying you hid your identity to manipulate readers. Professor Monroe adjusted his glasses. And people believe it because they already have a story. Margaret stopped walking. The truth is slower than gossip. I picked up one of the articles. A fabricated email occupied half the page. It carried the Hawthorne House logo, Margaret's digital signature. A forged internal memo claimed, the reveal will maximize emotional investment and boost fourth-quarter sales. It looked convincing, almost perfect, almost. I placed it back down. The formatting is wrong. Margaret looked at me. You noticed? The footer. She nodded. Our internal documents never use that template. Professor Monroe leaned closer. So someone copied an old design. Margaret pressed a button on the remote. The projector displayed security logs. We reviewed every employee account. She pointed to a highlighted section. No breach. No missing files. No stolen passwords. I frowned. Then the leak didn't come from Hawthorne House. No. She looked toward me. It came from someone who had access to university correspondence. The room fell silent. Only one place connected both the university and the publisher, the Literary Society. Across campus, the Literary Society office buzzed with nervous energy. Reporters had begun calling students directly. Club members whispered in small groups. Phones rang without pause. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, staring at the projector screen. The forged email appeared there too. A sophomore shook his head. I knew anonymous authors were fake. Another student nodded. It was all marketing. Evelyn spoke quietly. No. Everyone turned. She stepped toward the screen. This isn't real. The sophomore crossed his arms. You know him now? No. But I know his writing. The room laughed uneasily. You can recognize fake emails through novels? I can recognize integrity. The room became uncomfortable. One student muttered, You're defending him pretty hard. Evelyn ignored him. Instead, she examined the document more carefully. Then, she froze. Something tiny caught her eye. Near the bottom, a hidden metadata line, not visible in screenshots, only on the original PDF. She leaned closer. Her heartbeat quickened. A document editor's initials. DW. Her expression changed. There was only one person in the Literary Society with those initials. Daniel West, vice president, her closest teammate. That evening, Daniel sat alone inside the debate club office. He calmly packed folders into his briefcase. The door opened. Evelyn. He smiled. You look exhausted. She closed the door behind her. Where did you get the email? His smile remained. What email? The fake one. I've been busy. Daniel. She stepped closer. I saw the metadata. For the first time, his smile faded. I don't know what you're talking about. You edited it. Silence. He laughed softly. So, she stared. You actually think I forged it? I don't want to, but you believe it. He walked around the desk. Interesting. You admired Blackfeather for years. He shrugged. And suddenly you're defending him. I defend the truth. No. He smiled coldly. You defend the man. Evelyn's jaw tightened. What did he ever do to you? Daniel looked out the window. He embarrassed me. She blinked. What? 3 years ago. His voice remained calm. I submitted a manuscript to Hawthorne House. Recognition flashed across her face. You never told anyone. I didn't need to. It was rejected. They didn't just reject it. He laughed once. They sent me a letter explaining exactly why. His eyes darkened. They compare my work to Blackfeather. Understanding settled over Evelyn like ice. You've hated him ever since. I hated what people worshipped. He looked back at her. Anonymous genius. Mysterious perfection. I wanted people to stop believing. So you forged evidence. I gave them something they believe. You lied. I gave the internet exactly what it wanted. Evelyn's voice hardened. I'm reporting this. Daniel smiled again. You have no proof. I returned to campus the next morning. Not because anyone asked me to, because the library still needed volunteers. Nothing about success had changed that. Mrs. Holloway, the head librarian, looked relieved when I walked through the doors. I was afraid you wouldn't come back. Why? She smiled. Famous people usually leave. I work here. You don't have to anymore. I never had to. She laughed. Fair point. For the first time in days, life felt almost ordinary. I sorted return books, helped freshmen locate reference materials, recommended novels to students who had no idea who I was. Some recognized me. Most didn't. It was strangely comforting. Around noon, hurried footsteps echoed across the reading room. Elias. I looked up. Evelyn stood there, breathing hard. She had clearly run across campus. Can we talk? Mrs. Holloway glanced between us. I'll cover the desk. I nodded. We stepped into the quiet archive room. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows. Dust floated lazily through the air. Evelyn didn't waste time. I know who forged the email. I remained silent. Daniel West. Evidence. Not enough. She clenched her fists. But I know. Knowing isn't enough. I realized that. She took a slow breath. I searched the club computers. And he erased everything. Then why are you here? Her answer came immediately. Because I remembered something. She reached into her bag. A small black flash drive rested in her palm. Daniel asked me to review a sponsorship proposal last week. She handed it to me. I made a backup before returning it. I turn it over in my hand. And he forgets that computers remember more than people. Professor Monroe entered just then, carrying his laptop. I heard. He connected the flash drive. Minutes passed. Folders opened. Deleted files reappeared. Temporary caches. Revision histories. Hidden metadata. Then, one recovered draft appeared on the screen. Its file name. Reveal_strategy_final.docs. Margaret, who had arrived moments earlier, leaned over the keyboard. This. She opened the document. Inside were multiple versions of the forged email. Each revision carried Daniel's university login. Timestamps. Edit histories. Embedded author information. Everything. Professor Monroe slowly removed his glasses. That, he said quietly, is proof. The room fell silent. Not because justice had arrived, because it no longer needed anyone to argue for it. Outside the archive, voices began rising. News spread through the faculty building with astonishing speed. Within the hour, the university president called an emergency disciplinary meeting. By evening, every major outlet had updated its headlines. Forged email exposed. University student admitted to fabricating black feather scandal. Daniel resigned from every campus position before the hearing concluded. His unpublished manuscripts were scrutinized. Several passages were found to contain plagiarized material from lesser-known authors. The literary world that he had tried to manipulate closed its doors to him. Not because I demanded punishment, but because his own choices unraveled under scrutiny. As I left the administration building, reporters crowded the entrance. Questions flew toward me. Do you have a statement? Will you sue him? Do you forgive him? I paused only once. The truth doesn't need my revenge, I said. It only needed time. I walked down the stone steps without looking back. Behind me, cameras kept flashing. Ahead of me, the campus library stood exactly where it always had. For the first time since the debate hall, I walked toward it without carrying the weight of someone else's assumptions. The Monday after the scandal felt almost unnaturally quiet. No television vans, no shouting reporters, no students pretending to study while secretly recording videos. Rain had washed the campus during the night, leaving the stone walkways shining beneath the morning sun. For the first time in weeks, people seemed to remember that a university existed for more than gossip. I unlocked the library side entrance at 7:30. Mrs. Holloway was already inside, balancing 2 mugs of coffee. She looked at me over the rims of her glasses. I made one with sugar. You remembered. I've remembered for 4 years. She slid the mug across the desk. You've just been too busy hiding to notice. I smiled. She wasn't wrong. The library smelled the way it always had. Old paper, polished wood, and quiet concentration. It felt like coming home. For the next hour, I shelved returned books in peaceful silence. No applause. No interviews. Only the soft rhythm of pages finding their places. Some victories sounded exactly like that. Around 10 o'clock, Professor Monroe arrived carrying a cardboard box. He sat on the circulation desk with exaggerated care. Mrs. Holloway peeked inside. "Oh," she laughed. "You've finally done it." I frowned. "Done what?" Professor Monroe pushed the box toward me. "Open it." Inside lay dozens of freshly printed copies of my newest novel. The cover was unlike my previous books. No black feather. No anonymous emblem. Instead, simple silver lettering. Elias Rowan. My own name. For several moments, I couldn't speak. I reached out carefully and ran my fingertips across the cover. It felt unfamiliar, almost like holding someone else's work. Professor Monroe watched quietly. "Does it bother you?" "A little." "Why?" "Because people will see me before they see the story." And I looked at the title. Maybe that's no longer something I can control. He nodded. No writer ever could. That afternoon, Hawthorne House released a public statement. Not defending me, not attacking Daniel. Instead, they announced a scholarship, the Black Feather Literary Grant. Its purpose was simple: support anonymous young writers who lacked confidence to publish under their own names. Margaret called me shortly afterward. "You approved it without reading the proposal." "I trusted you." She laughed. "That still surprises me. I've had good editors. We've had a stubborn author. I prefer careful." "So do I." Her tone softened. "I thought you should know." "Know what?" "We've already received more than 3,000 applications." I leaned back in my chair. "So many. There are more hidden voices than either of us imagined." After the call ended, I remained staring at the bookshelves. Perhaps anonymity had never been cowardice. Perhaps it had simply been the first bridge many people needed before finding the courage to cross into the light. Late in the afternoon, a hesitant knock echoed through the library. I looked up. Evelyn stood at the entrance. She wasn't carrying debate notes or trophies, only a worn notebook held tightly against her chest. Mrs. Holloway glanced toward me. "I'll organize the archives." She disappeared before either of us could protest. Evelyn approached slowly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You aren't." She looked around the empty reading room. "It feels different here. It always felt like this." I never noticed. I believed her. She placed the notebook on the table between us. "I brought something." "What is it?" "My scholarship essay. The one inspired by your books." She nodded. "I reread it yesterday, and I realized something embarrassing." "What?" She smiled weakly. "I quoted your words perfectly." She tapped her chest. "But I wasn't living them." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the notebook. Her handwriting filled every page. Neat, careful, thoughtful. Dozens of passages from my novels appeared in blue ink. Beside each quotation, she had written reflections. Questions, doubts, dreams. None of it looked performative. It looked honest. "I wanted you to have it," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because it belongs to the person who unknowingly helped write it." I closed the notebook gently. "It belongs to you." She shook her head. "No, it belongs to the version of me who believed understanding words automatically meant understanding people." Her eyes met mine. "I don't want to be that person anymore." Autumn faded into early winter. The scandal slowly disappeared from headlines. Students returned to worrying about exams instead of viral videos. Life continued, as it always did. I accepted fewer interviews than my publisher wanted. I continued volunteering at the library. And once each month, I visited the creative writing workshop Professor Monroe had quietly started. The first meeting surprised me. Only 7 students came. None introduced themselves by achievements. Instead, they introduced themselves by the stories they wanted to tell. One wanted to write about growing up with a deaf brother. Another dreamed of historical mysteries. A shy engineering student confessed he secretly wrote poetry. No one laughed. No one ranked talent. For 2 hours, People simply listened. When the workshop ended, Professor Monroe stood beside me near the doorway. You've built exactly what you wanted. I didn't build it. You inspired it. That's different. He smiled. Is it? Evelyn began attending 2 weeks later. Not as the debate champion. Not as the campus celebrity. She arrived early, sat near the back, shared drafts only when asked. The first story she read aloud surprised everyone, including me. It wasn't argumentative. It wasn't polished. It was about a little girl who believed every book had a heartbeat. When she finished, silence filled the room. Not awkward silence. Thoughtful silence. Finally, the engineering student raised his hand. I liked the ending. So did I. Another said. No one mentioned her trophies. No one praised her reputation. They responded only to the story. After the meeting, she walked beside me toward the library. I was terrified. You hit it well. I almost left before reading. What changed your mind? She smiled. I remembered something you said. What? Books change depending on who's reading them. I remember. I realized people do too. We reached the library steps. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the evening air. She looked upward for a moment. I used to think confidence meant always being right. And now, I think, she searched for the words. It means being willing to discover you've been wrong. I nodded. That's much harder. It is. She laughed softly. I've been practicing. There was no romance waiting between us. No dramatic confession. No sudden promise that everything would become perfect. What grew instead was quieter. Respect. Trust. The kind that survived disappointment because it had been rebuilt honestly. Months later, during the university's annual literary festival, students invited me to speak. This time, I accepted without hesitation. As I walked onto the familiar stage, I recognized the debate hall immediately. The same lights, the same rows of seats, the same polished floor. Yet everything felt different. Not because the room had changed, because I had. I glanced toward the front row. Professor Monroe sat beside Mrs. Holloway. Margaret had flown in for the event. The writing workshop occupied an entire section together. Evelyn sat among them, not in front, not seeking attention, simply listening. I smiled before beginning. Years earlier, I had walked away from this stage carrying humiliation. Today, I stepped onto it carrying nothing heavier than my notes. The difference wasn't fame. It was peace. The invitation arrived without ceremony. No embossed envelope. No publisher's seal. Just a simple email from the university president. Subject: closing address request. At the bottom was a single sentence. 1 year ago, this campus learned the danger of judging appearances. We hope you'll speak at the incoming students' orientation. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. Mrs. Holloway looked up from her desk. Bad news. No. Worse. I laughed. They want me to give a speech. She pretended to gasp. The quietest man in the library? They've clearly made a mistake. I don't think they have. She handed me a return novel. People don't remember speeches. They remember how someone made them feel. I turned the book over in my hands. She smiled knowingly. Sound familiar? It did. Those words could have come from one of my own novels. Orientation Day transformed the campus. Freshmen wandered through unfamiliar buildings with maps in their hands. Parents took photographs beneath ancient oak trees. Volunteers directed endless streams of nervous students toward lecture halls. I waited backstage, not anxious, just thoughtful. Professor Monroe adjusted the microphone on my jacket. You've become easier to convince. I've become harder to hide. He chuckled. Fair enough. Margaret joined us moments later. She carried no folders, no contracts, only a thin package wrapped in brown paper. Open it after the speech. What is it? A thank you. For what? For finally allowing readers to meet the man whose words they've carried for years. Before I could respond, the announcer called my name. The curtain opened. Thousands of students filled the auditorium. Exactly 1 year earlier, another audience had laughed when I questioned a quotation. Today, they waited in complete silence. I stepped to the podium, looked across the room, then began. When I was a student, a few people smiled. I believed the hardest part of writing was finding the right words. I paused. I was wrong. The hardest part, I glanced toward the first row. Was believing those words still mattered after people saw who wrote them. The hall remained perfectly still. I didn't tell them about viral videos, or humiliation, or headlines. I didn't need to. Instead, I spoke about curiosity, about listening, about asking one more question before deciding who someone was. Near the end, I closed my notes. There is a sentence I never published. The audience leaned forward. I wrote it years ago, but I crossed it out. I smiled. I think it belongs here instead. I took a slow breath. A closed book can still change your life. Another pause. A closed mind never will. Silence. Then applause. Not loud at first, just sincere. It spread slowly through the hall until every student stood. I bowed once. Not because I had one, because gratitude deserved humility. After the ceremony ended, students lined up to ask questions. Most wanted writing advice. Some asked how to overcome fear. One young man lingered until everyone else had gone. He held a worn notebook. I don't think I'm good enough. I recognized the sentence immediately. Years ago, I had told myself the same thing. May I read something? I asked. He handed me the notebook. His first page was rough, unpolished, honest. I looked up. Keep writing. Really? Really? What if nobody likes it? I smiled. Then write the next one. His shoulders relaxed. As he walked away, I realized something. Hope rarely arrived through grand speeches. Sometimes, it arrived through permission. That evening, the campus library closed an hour early. Mrs. Holloway claimed it was for maintenance. No one believed her. Inside the reading hall, a small gathering waited. Professor Monroe, Margaret, the writing workshop, several librarians, a few students who had become friends over the past year. Nothing extravagant, just tea, books, conversation, exactly the kind of celebration I preferred. Mrs. Holloway clapped her hands once. Before anyone leaves, she pointed toward Margaret. Open the package. I almost forgot. The brown paper had remained beneath my arm all afternoon. Carefully, I untied the string. Inside was a single hardbound book. No title, no publisher's logo, only deep blue leather. I opened the cover. The first page contained handwritten letters from readers around the world. A father whose daughter had survived depression. A teacher who had rebuilt a neglected school library. A widow who found comfort after loss. A teenager who chose to keep living because one sentence in a novel convinced him tomorrow deserved a chance. Page after page. Hundreds of voices. No rankings. No sales numbers. No awards. Only lives quietly touched. I couldn't speak. Margaret finally broke the silence. You always measured success by the stories you told. She looked around the room. We thought it was time you saw the stories that answered back. My vision blurred. Professor Monroe pretended to study the ceiling. Mrs. Holloway discreetly handed me a handkerchief. I refused to cry in my own library, I said. She laughed. Too late. Everyone joined in. The room filled with warm, ordinary laughter, the kind that asked nothing in return. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked alone between the library shelves one final time. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows. The building was silent, peaceful. I stopped before the section where I had spent countless afternoons shelving books. So many years, so many unnoticed moments. I ran my fingers lightly across the spines. Stories written by strangers. Stories that had survived generations. None of them cared whether their authors had once been mocked. Only whether someone opened the first page. I smiled. The debate hall. The laughter. The headlines. Daniel's bitterness. Evelyn's regret. My fear of being seen. None of it disappeared. It had simply found its proper place. Not chains. Chapters. Behind me, footsteps echoed softly. I turned. Evelyn stood in the doorway, holding a returned library book. I thought you might still be here. You know me well. She smiled. I've been trying to. She placed the book on the return cart. No speeches this time. No debates. No debates. We stood together in comfortable silence. Finally, she asked, if you could rewrite one page of your life. I considered the question carefully, then shook my head. I wouldn't, not even the debate hall. Especially not the debate hall. She looked surprised. Why? Because if people had applauded me that day. I looked around the quiet library. I might never have learned the difference between being admired. I glanced at the letters resting inside the blue book and being understood. She nodded slowly. I think I finally understand that too. We walked toward the exit. Mrs. Holloway switched off the final reading lamp behind us. The library settled into darkness. Outside, the first stars appeared above the campus. I locked the door, not as someone hiding from the world, but as someone who had finally found his place within it. The stories would continue. So would the readers. And somewhere, in the quiet turning of another page, another unseen voice would discover that it was enough to be heard, without first being believed. The end.